Imagine this. A man sits in a dimly lit interrogation room. His hands tremble, not from guilt at least not the kind you'd expect, but from the terrifying realization that he can no longer recognize the person he's become. Just 6 months ago, he was praised by his neighbors, adored by his children, and trusted by his colleagues. Honest, kind, empathetic, the kind of man who rescued stray animals and volunteered on weekends. Today, he's here for a crime so brutal that even the officers standing outside the room refuse to look him in the eye. He whispers to himself, "I didn't mean to become this." But what does that mean? What do people mean when they say they lost themselves? What exactly was lost and what took its place? You tell yourself you'd never do what he did, that monsters are born, not made, that you're different better. But are you sure? Imagine a line thin, fragile, nearly invisible between moral conviction and blind justification, between principled strength and manipulative control, between righteous anger and destructive cruelty. The line flickers, it moves, and sometimes it disappears altogether. Now imagine this. What if that line was never real? What if the monster isn't some external other, hidden in the shadows of society, but a dormant part of you, waiting for the right conditions to awaken? The terrifying truth isn't that evil exists in the world, it's that it can disguise itself as virtue, that it can wear the face of a loving parent, a thoughtful teacher, a passionate activist, that it can whisper, "You're doing the right thing," while tightening its grip around someone else's throat. You've seen this before. The devout believer who begins persecuting others in the name of purity, the overprotective father who becomes tyrannical under the guise of love, the betrayed spouse who turns cold, calculating, vindictive while still calling it justice. Where is the threshold where righteousness turns into cruelty? When does a protector become a jailer? And how does a kind soul become the very thing it once feared? The philosopher Carl Jung warned us long ago, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The more tightly we cling to our image of goodness, the more violently we deny and therefore feeder hidden darkness. Do you know what your shadow looks like? Have you ever truly faced it? Because here's the paradox. The people most convinced of their goodness are often the least aware of what they're capable of. And that ignorance, that refusal to turn inward is precisely what gives the shadow its power. Good people don't become monsters overnight. It happens in whispers, in justifications, in subtle shifts of boundary and belief. It begins when pain is buried instead of felt, when anger is suppressed until it erupts, when obedience becomes submission, when trauma becomes identity. And slowly, a transformation unfolds not into something other, but into something hidden, something that was always there. So ask yourself, are you truly good? Or have you just never been tested? Because the world doesn't reward goodness. It rewards conformity, convenience, control. And in a world built on appearances, the mask of virtue is often easier to wear than the armor of self-awareness. Could it be that some of the worst things ever done in history were done by people who thought they were doing good? What if the road to monstrosity is paved not with hatred, but with unchecked pain and a desperate need to belong? And if that's true, if even the best of us are capable of becoming the worst, then what hope is there? What defense can we possibly have against this invisible erosion of the soul? What can we do when the monster looks like us? Hold on to that question, because to understand how good people turn into monsters, we have to dig deeper past the surface, into the layers beneath behavior and belief. We have to descend into the unconscious. Not everyone comes back from that place, but if you're ready, we'll go there next. To truly understand how good people turn into monsters, we need to strip away the comforting lie that morality is fixed, that there are good people and bad people, neatly divided like chess pieces on a board. The truth is much more unsettling. Morality is situational, fragile, and often distorted by forces we rarely acknowledge. Let's start with Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dared to look where few others would, into the depths of the unconscious. Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or project onto others. These include our rage, jealousy, greed, lust, and cruelty, but also our strength, our confidence, our ambition. Everything we're afraid to see in ourselves becomes part of the shadow. The shadow, Jung wrote, is 90% pure gold. That's because when we disown it, we give it the power to control us from behind the scenes. But when we face it, integrate it, we gain wholeness. Here's the danger. The more someone insists they are purely good, purely moral, purely virtuous, the larger their unconscious shadow grows. And in time, that repressed darkness erupts, often suddenly, often destructively. Think of the quiet man who explodes in violence after years of emotional repression. Or the religious zealot who's cruel in the name of righteousness. Or the political activist who demonizes opponents while claiming the moral high ground. These are not anomalies. They are case studies in unintegrated shadow. Now let's bring in Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." A warning, not just about others, but about ourselves. Nietzsche believed the desire for moral superiority often hides a will to power a deep hunger to control, dominate, or destroy, masked as virtue. This is the uncomfortable truth behind many good actions. They aren't always rooted in compassion. Sometimes they're rooted in fear, or ego, or the desperate need to feel in control. Arthur Schopenhauer, another philosophical heavyweight, had a bleak view of human nature. He saw life as driven by blind, irrational willing, endless striving that leads to suffering. In his view, cruelty arises not from evil intent, but from the collision of individual wills, each seeking fulfillment in a world that cannot satisfy all of them. So, when people hurt others, it's often not because they're evil, but because they're in pain, desperate, starving for meaning, for love, for validation. In that desperation, they may commit acts that even they don't fully understand. Modern psychology backs this up. Dr. Gabor Mate, renowned for his work on addiction and trauma, argues that almost all destructive behavior is a response to pain. That addiction, cruelty, manipulation, even criminal behavior can often be traced back to childhood trauma, emotional neglect, or unresolved psychological wounds. His famous phrase is this: "Don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain." Asterisk. Now, let's connect the dots. When you take a person who's experienced trauma, add in a culture that tells them to repress their pain, surround them with systems that reward control and punish vulnerability, and feed them narratives of moral certainty, what do you think happens? You get a fractured soul, a person who looks fine on the outside but is unraveling internally. And one day, that internal chaos breaks through the surface. This isn't a hypothetical. This is happening every day, in marriages, in schools, in workplaces, on the world stage. The shadows we refuse to face are becoming the monsters we can no longer control. But there's another layer, and it's even more dangerous. It's when society or culture, our institutions, incentivize the shadow. When anger becomes entertainment, when cruelty becomes currency, when victimhood becomes power, when division becomes profit. In such an environment, the person who suppresses their darkness becomes naive, and the person who embraces it without awareness becomes predatory. That's why good people, especially those who haven't faced their inner wounds, are at high risk. Because without self-knowledge, they are puppets to whatever emotional storm blows through them. And often, that storm has a face: betrayal, shame, rejection, isolation. In the wake of those storms, many lose themselves. Some become bitter. Others become cruel. And a few tragically become monsters. Not because they wanted to, but because they were never taught how not to. To understand how the descent happens in real life, we have to move beyond theory and look directly at the faces behind the fall. Let's begin with an example from history. Adolf Eichmann, of the chief architects of the Holocaust. When he stood trial in 1961, the world expected a monster, cold, sadistic, calculating. Instead, what they saw shocked them. He was soft-spoken, polite, ordinary, a family man, not a psychopath, not a raving ideologue, just a bureaucrat. Eichmann claimed he was just following orders, doing his job. His horrifying efficiency in organizing the logistics of genocide wasn't driven by hatred. It was driven by duty, by structure, by the belief that he was serving a higher cause. Philosopher Hannah Arendt coined a chilling phrase to describe him: the banality of evil. Evil not as some fiery force, but as a quiet, bureaucratic indifference. A man who refused to question the morality of his actions because he needed to believe he was good. That's what makes it so terrifying. He didn't feel like a monster. Now, shift your focus to something more intimate. Take the story of a woman who grew up in a deeply religious home, taught to be obedient, selfless, and pure. She marries young, endures years of emotional neglect, but never complains. Because she believes suffering is noble, one day she finds her husband cheating. Something inside her snaps. Over the next year, she becomes manipulative, cold, and controlling not only toward him, but toward her children. She doesn't even notice the shift. She tells herself she's being strong, protective, that her behavior is justified. She still believes she's a good person, but her children begin to fear her. Her friends drift away. Her world contracts. What changed? The truth is nothing. That darkness was always there. It just had no outlet until pain cracked the mask wide open. Now think about yourself. Have you ever been ghosted and thought, "I'll make them regret it"? Have you ever taken joy in someone else's failure? Have you ever told yourself a lie and repeated it so often it felt like truth? These moments seem small, but they are invitations. Each one a test. Will you confront your shadower? Will you feed it? Here's the turning point. Most people don't decide to become monsters. They slide into it, one small betrayal at a time. One denied emotion. One convenient lie. One suppressed truth. It begins when a person stops asking, "Who am I becoming?" and starts asking, "What do I deserve? How can I win? Why me?" That's the moment the descent begins, not into madness, but into justification. In modern society, this spiral is everywhere. Asterisk. The influencer who fakes perfection to cover deep insecurity. Asterisk. The corporate leader who sacrifices ethics for profit but calls it strategy. Asterisk. The revolutionary who begins with ideals and ends with purges. And what makes it worse? Society often rewards this transformation. People praise your confidence when you suppress emotion. They cheer your brutal honesty when you're actually being cruel. They admire your ambition when it's really addiction to control. So, the question becomes, how do you stop the descent? It doesn't start with discipline, or morals, or punishment. It starts with a mirror, with the courage to look at the parts of yourself you despise, the parts you've buried, the thoughts that scare you, the memories you've avoided, the lies you tell. This is where shadow work begins. Not to shame yourself, but to know yourself. To realize that the capacity for cruelty lives in all of you and that confronting it is the only way to prevent it from taking over. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." You're not born a monster, But you can become one if you're unwilling to confront who you are in the quiet, hidden places. Because no one wakes up one day and decides to burn their life down. But many ignore the matches in their hand. If the descent into the monstrous self is slow and subtle, the path out is equally difficult but profoundly transformative. It doesn't lie in denial or repression. It begins with a terrifying but necessary act: turning inward. This is the core of shadow work, a term popularized by Carl Jung. He believed that every individual carries a shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche made up of repressed desires, instincts, and emotions we consider unacceptable. Most people think they are good simply because they avoid thinking about their darkness. They build a personality based on approval, tradition, or rebellion. But beneath that lies the real self, a storm of urges, fears, grief, lust, rage, and vulnerability. The irony? The more you suppress the shadow, the more control it has over your life. So, how do you face it? It starts with a brutally honest question. What parts of myself have I disowned? Is it your anger, your sexuality, your envy, your hunger for power, your fear of abandonment? Maybe you suppress these emotions because you were taught they're shameful, or because you think, good people don't feel such things, but repressing them doesn't make them go away. It makes them grow in silence. And eventually, they act out in ways you don't even notice. You say you're just being honest when you're actually being cruel. You say you're standing up for yourself when you're actually dominating others. You say you're independent when you're just afraid of being close. The point of shadow work isn't to destroy these parts, but to integrate them, to bring them into consciousness where they can be acknowledged, understood, and redirected. For example, anger, when owned and channeled, becomes assertiveness and the drive to protect. Envy can highlight what you truly value and push you toward growth. Fear can show you where you still need healing. The monster becomes the guardian when it is understood. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is the truth most people avoid. Your shadow isn't the enemy. Your ignorance of it is. And here's where the process gets even more powerful. When you stop running from your shadow, something unexpected happens. You begin to feel whole. Not perfect, not pure, but real, rooted, awake. You stop overreacting to criticism. You stop needing to dominate others. You stop pretending to be someone you're not, because you've already seen the worst in yourself and you didn't flinch. This level of self-awareness creates something rare in modern society: inner sovereignty. A person who is not ruled by their emotions or compulsions is a dangerous persona in the best way possible. They cannot be easily manipulated. They don't need constant validation. They don't depend on ideology or tribe to feel strong. They are not perfect, but they are anchored. This process isn't linear. Shadow work is cyclical. You'll face new layers of yourself at different stages of life. The betrayal that didn't bother you at 20 might unravel you at 40. The insecurity you thought you buried may reappear during a moment of failure. But each time, you'll face it with deeper insight, with less fear, because you've done the work before. And that's the secret. Self-transformation doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means becoming more yourself, the full version, not just the image, not just the virtue signals, not just the Instagram mask, but the raw, complex, contradictory, beautiful mess that is a whole human being. Think about the people you truly respect. Are they the ones who've never made mistakes? Or the ones who've fallen and risen again, wiser, more grounded, and more real? The monster inside you doesn't need to be killed. It needs to be seen. Once you see it, you can choose every day, in every moment, to act from fear, from truth, to lash outer, to stand firm, to manipulateer, to love with boundaries. to bury your pain or to alchemize it into strength. You don't become a god. You don't become pure. You become whole. We live in a time where external noise drowns out inner truth. You're told to be positive, to smile more, to be productive, to keep scrolling, to buy things that numb you, to be liked by people who barely know you. But beneath all this, a deeper voice calls you a voice ancient, raw, and honest. It whispers, wake up, look inside, face what you've been avoiding. Because if you don't, the world will do it for you. Through heartbreak, through addiction, through anxiety that grips your chest at 2 a.m., through the crushing realization that success doesn't equal peace, through relationships that mirror your inner chaos. The truth is hard. No one is coming to save you. Not the guru, not the government, not the partner you keep fantasizing about, not the job promotion, not even your therapist, if you're not willing to be radically honest. You save you. You become the parent you never had. You become the friend you always needed. You become the soul that forgives your broken parts not by excusing them, but by owning them. It's not glamorous. It's not Instagram-worthy. It's not something people applaud, but it's real, and it's yours. This is the path of self-transformation, and it always begins in the dark. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You might think the darkness will break you. It won't. It will remake you, but not as someone better, as someone truer. The pain you carry isn't punishment, it's potential. The shadow you fear isn't evil, it's power misunderstood. The voice inside you that's been silenced isn't crazy, it's wise. So here's the call. Stop pretending. Stop numbing. Stop waiting for someone else to validate your path. Sit down with your shame. Look your fear in the eye. Ask your rage what it's trying to protect. Listen to the wounded child inside you and promise you won't abandon them again. You're not weak for struggling. You're not broken for being lost. You're not crazy for questioning this world. In fact, those are signs you're still alive. Because numbness is the real sickness of our age, and avoidance is the silent killer of the soul. So write it down, speak it out, cry if you must. But face it, because what you don't face will rule you, and what you bring into the light can never control you again. That's where your power is. Not in pretending to be strong, but in choosing to be real. You want transformation? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You will lose parts of yourself. The fake self, the masked self, the performative self. You will grieve the illusion of who you thought you had to be. But in that loss, something holy is born. The self that is you, unfiltered. The self that can look in the mirror and say, I know you, I see you, I love you, let's do this. So, if you're watching this, and something in you stirs follow that, don't wait for permission. Don't wait to be ready. Start now. Start messy. Start afraid. Start uncertain. But start, because there's a version of you on the other side of all this. Not perfect, not healed, but liberated. And they're waiting for you.